Well, here we are after another successful year of riding coasters, ending in 2025 with 76 roller coasters in 7 states. Now, I know this may feel weird as of posting this, that nothing really came out for 2025 in terms of my experiences, and not all for 2024 was released. So I'll give a brief synopsis of what occurred in 2025. Now, for me, 2025 would be the most ambitious year for coasters yet in many aspects. From statistical monsters to parks visited, to states experienced, to thrill rides that felt like no other. Really, I got a nice variety of coasters that really wowed me this year, where I felt like I have to really choose my favorites over relying on default coasters placements, like what happened in 2024 and 2023. Now, yes, this is likely not as much as other enthusiasts may have, but this is still a precious collection that I've mostly enjoyed. And to not only celebrate this year, but to also update the viewers on what I've done, this is my top 30 roller coasters as of December 14th, 2025. Now, the rules before we begin the list. For one, this is an opportunity to not fully reflective for 2025, given that there could be a possible park or two squeezed in before the year ends. I've also intended this to release on the list on December 24th, 2025, in order to line up the list before I release my cameo video on Christmas Day. As of the recording, I have gotten the video on the 2 days ago, so there you go. And given that December 24th to January 5th has the potential for a lot to happen in my coaster life, I'm going to cap the list here. Don't worry, there probably is going to be more coming though next year. Second notice is that this list is subjective, in which the preferences for one ride to the next is all dependent on my tastes. In which I have a preference for rides that structure in many different types of maneuvers and forces, while keeping up the frequency of the forces for a long time. The forces don't necessarily have to be the strongest and craziest, but can help make specific moments have a more lasting impact for me, although not necessarily carrying an entire ride. I'll also elaborate on structure, as in what it is more so like, instead of just going from element to element, it's more so building upon each other. It has like each element correlates to the next. So let's say there's like the first half is kind of intense, but not really. Then the second half, and then it keeps on building and building. Maybe Velocicoaster similar to that, but I haven't ridden it. But that's probably the best example. I also don't have much of an issue for roughness, as long as the ride isn't forceless. Looking at Roar specifically in this case as a rough ride that I don't like. Finally, before going on to the list, I would mention that some coasters that might have made the list, but for whatever reason, I missed them during my visits for these places. I'll place a timestamp on the screen right now if you want to skip to the number 30th spot. So first off would be the top 3 roller coasters at Islands Adventure. So it's Hagrid's Incredible Hulk and the aforementioned Velocicoaster. These 3 roller coasters I pretty much chickened out on, which was pretty sad given I would have likely loved these creations. Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure would probably feel like a ride that would have placed in a decent spot in my top 20, given that I love long rides with a lot of coaster action, even if the ride is family friendly. Then the Incredible Hulk seems to be a B&M at its best, with some of the best forces and pacing I've seen from the rides, while holding a familiar force types as well compared to other B&Ms. I would have anticipated this ranking at the number 5 spot if I rode this. Then the Velocicoaster would have easily taken number 1 with the pacing, various forces, and the build up from the solid start to an epic finish. Next up we have Defiance at Glenwood Caverns. It was a ride that I also chickened out on, but overall seems to be a solid looper with various amount of forces. Although quite short in length, this could have placed in 27th on the list. Then talking about closed coasters that I've missed, that could have made it on here, Superman Ride of Steel and Batwing at Six Flags America had really good chances to do so. Superman seemed like a nice hyper with a mix of forces and great sense of speed, for a long time, while not the most perfect in pacing. That could have probably not placed in my top 10. But Batwing, on the other hand, seems to actually hold a potential that a flying coaster could hold for me in terms of force type and different feelings of these maneuvers compared to a B&M. Unfortunately, though, we cannot experience these two anymore, which is a shame given that these would have been the best rides at Six Flags America, or at the very least the most unique. Then the big prize that I've missed out on was Pantherian at King's Dominion. Yay. Now, I'll talk about the story of Pantherian when we get into the more in-depth videos or analysis of my experiences, which is not this video. But for now, I'll just say that I missed out on this excellently paced and forceful coaster because Pantherian had lift issues, let's just say. Final two coasters I'll mention are under construction products with Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift that likely will have a pretty nice forces and decent pacing, plus a nice quantity of elements that really doesn't make the ride feel too short, but at the same time doesn't really feel like too long. I don't expect Fast and Furious to really be a #1 roller coaster for me, but I do expect it to have some nice forces. And then as well, Twin Mill Racers at Matilda Adventure Park that also has a nice variety of forces. It seems like it has nice airtime positives and maybe some laterals that could also apply to the previous one, and maybe hang time, and elements that are modest in size for the layout, although not too big given this is a kind of a modified loop screw layout, so it's not the biggest, but as well, like those are not really too big, but it's a little more at least. I'm likely to experience these when these both open to the public, but so far these haven't opened yet. So I guess it's a we'll see thing. Anyways, with all this out of the way, I'll now start the coaster summary, starting with Full Throttle at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Now, in terms of ride experience, this coaster is an excellent option for individual elements, with all the elements holding a punch of its own. From the first launch feeling decently forceful with the high speed and constant acceleration, to the large vertical loop having many seconds of sustained hang time, to the trick that's hidden away from the plaza, to the final drop being the most forceful drop that I've done so far, at least for airtime. It's really a cool ride that feels pretty unique in many ways, but for some reason there's something that kind of itches my head, something that feels off. And for that answer, I'll note one main thing, that being the pacing of the coaster, where the coaster feels pretty short and incomplete compared to other rides. Just having an awesome start and an awesome end, and the track that really just loops around the mountain in order to connect to the loop and drop together. I really would wish that the more track was existent after the loop and trick doing more, given that a middle section would feel like more build up towards an epic finale. Having more to do instead of having a novelty for a large loop connecting a drop to the structure. It ranks this high though, given for the amazing forces and moments during the ride, but severely lacks in the build-up needed to really feel elite, thus making number 30 on this list. Now following up that would be a coaster that I haven't ridden in a long time, but yet would enjoy still after 2 years. Mineshaft Coaster would be an alpine coaster that would utilize the hillside for supports and layout, and to my shock, the coaster would feel quite eventful during the descent. Well, yes, after each lift hill, the coaster would start up slow. The ride quickly gains speed, where many different variations of laterals are conveyed. From more sustained helixes and large drops, the quicker pops on the S-bends and smaller turns, to even airtime on the drops. The ride holds a nice platter of elements while on a long coaster experience, that holds its speed decently well. Well, yes, alpine coasters are naturally not going to be as varied as their true coaster counterparts. At the very least, Mineshaft Coaster didn't feel derivative in a rare California coaster in California, focusing on laterals. Although a more notable issue that I would be that there are a few moments where track doesn't really do anything, where the coaster has some long straight sections, in which there are a few times where they are present during the layout. In return, these straight sections are interruptive of the fun pacing presented. Thankfully, the ride length is long enough to really not have much an issue. It kind of detracts the full potential of the ride that could be. Regardless, I would say that the most Eastern California coaster is pretty underrated, and not a bad option for the $20 price tag. And another expensive coaster is up next. So now we hit our one of many controversial takes that I have, which includes the one and only Big Apple coaster. Now for this creation, there's no better feeling to describe the ride as bizarre. Throughout the experience, the rider would notice a lot of things, some of which are inconsistent and mixed. An easy one to pinpoint is the smooth consistency, as generally the Big Apple feels pretty smooth and real hugging, no shaking side to side or really anything, and even some turns that flow kind of decently. But others have really bizarre profile that has constant jolts on what should be a simple airtime hill. Like this hill, for example, has like at 4, 5, 6 jolts. But more importantly, the forces feel weird as well, where the first half feels completely different than the second. With the first force focusing on these larger drops that sometimes decide to have random bursts of positives. And then the second half having more smaller hills and turns that's more akin to a family coaster. Additionally, many types of sequencing for the elements exist for the coaster. Some you'll get run-of-the-mill pops of forces like weak pops on the little bunny hills, or sustained positives on the helixes. Then more questionable elements exist, but still not too bizarre, like the dial loop having a second of hang time transition to burst of sustained positives, or that vertical loop having no positives. Then there are things like the first 2 drops and hills that make me question the thought process behind the design. Having valleys that are pretty forceful, while having most ascents feeling really drawn out and shallow. Except the weirdest drop being this large one, where in the back only the steepest part of the drop offers a sustained floater for getting slammed in your seat. Like, this coaster is very weird and unconventional with the profiling and elements, but just amazes me for how fun and unique the ride is. From the punchy elements that come out of nowhere, like the large drop or the dive loop, to the variety of forces. In fact, this pretty much holds some of the most variety out of any coaster that I've done, as in you get a taste of a lot of stuff. And paired with the long ride experience, plus the exposing lap bars from Premiere, this should have been in my top 10, you know. Given that I really love these type of rides. But if it wasn't for one thing that I haven't mentioned yet. So if you don't know, I haven't brought up the mid-course brake run yet, in which for this coaster, it slows the train to a crawl. Now for some coasters this may be an interruption, but at least it doesn't take too long to clear. That is not what happens with the Big Apple coaster, in which over 10 seconds for the mid-course and turn itself, and then the next hill, which is back to back in fact, has 7 seconds of being very slow, forceless, and just crawling over. Not only these moments are forceless, like with the other shallow moments of track, but the moments feel slower in comparison to the first part that feels quite speedy. In which I was kind of generous of giving pass to those higher, the off the ground moments in the first half due to the abrupt forces in the valleys and speed, but alas, the pacing is also wonky for this ride as well. So unfortunately, this will have to stay at 28th. But, you know, I find the Big Apple so amusing that an individual review going more in depth is actually going to be really fun. But for now, my idea is if you like weird coasters, then I highly recommend trying this at least once. Even if it is expensive and even it is a bit remote. Probably the most memorable for Vegas, but I wouldn't say it would be my favorite. But, you know, that honor kind of goes to the next coaster with, El Loco the Adventure Dome. So while Big Apple is a long but somewhat meandering ride, El Loco would be a compact short coaster that has forceful elements with not much brakes, at least compared to the Big Apple. For those unaware, El Loco would be essentially a mix of the Gerstlauer Eurofighter and a Wild Mouse that's unshookified in which much of the elements would have extreme moments of force presented during the layout. From the unbanked hairpin turn with very forceful lateral sustained to ejector airtime pops on the first drop and the ascent up into the straight brake run. Due to dive loops having really sustained hang time more so than the Big Apple coaster above. Then nice positives after the first dive loop, which is pretty nice, along with lateral moments during the turns that turn the rider in the other direction, plus a pop of air. Wait, I already said that. In terms of pacing, the coaster is mostly frequent in this case, given that most elements are entertaining you in one way or another, although not perfect. My main gripes of the pacing really would be for a final wave turn, which really doesn't do anything for me after the dive loop, where no forces are presented after the hang time portion. It's some of the mid-course brake runs. This is in consideration that the layout feels quite short, so the forceless track would feel more noticeable in comparison to something like Mineshaft Coaster. I'll still give El Loco the edge for having a nice variety of really strong forces, but the pacing and length is something that I pretty much am in favor of. This is also somewhat related to my surprise for my number 26, in which that is Adrenaline Peak at Oaks Amusement Park. The Ghost Warrior fighter up in Oregon, basically. Now, while the forces for this are more mild in comparison, I would say that the coaster has less lulls in the pacing compared to El Loco, while not sacrificing the different types of forces and unfortunately keeps a similar short duration. To start naming some highlights, I really like the first drop offering nice ejector airtime in the back. The vertical loop had a nice mix of hang time and positives, although pretty mild for a thrill coaster. The cutback was pretty meh, where positive forces are only present. The Heartland roll was pretty nice, having decent hang time sustained, and surprisingly deceiving slope up that gives a nice burst of positives and airtime. The main thing that I prefer out of Adrenaline Peak, though, is that the flow more seamlessly compared to El Loco, and is pretty much the main reason it's one spot higher. Adrenaline Peak is still short as hell, though, and pretty much the last words I'll say until the review. So yeah. Next up is, starting off with our top 25, would be Scream at Magic Mountain as well. The first off, of all B&M loopers that I've been on. And personally, I would say this feels like the weakest out of all, excluding Firebird, which isn't on this list. Not to say this is a bad ride, but this is still a fun coaster with fluid pacing of other B&M inversions. But something feels off with this one as well. Because with the comparison to other loopers that I've done, Scream feels quite mild and stereotypical in elements. At least with the other B&Ms out there, more unique elements, unique pacing, and more forceful elements are present. Scream pretty much has meh inversions, mixed with a helix that has nice positives, as a combination of float and laterals on the 0G roll, and then the rest being meandering track. I would personally think the layout could do better with more exposed trains, like with stand-up trains. But that's likely never going to happen, so in preference, it's likely that I may use this as an introduction to multi-inversions for people who aren't familiar with those. Those people that don't really, aren't familiar with inversions, but they kind of got over with, their first inversion and stuff. But otherwise, would have preference for the other B&Ms in the state, really. Which we'll get to those soon, but right now, let's, talk another set of controversial takes. So if you don't know, I haven't had an issue with roughness, being the sole contributing factor for coasters that I've not enjoyed. Well, let me say this. Sure, there are rides that I don't like that are also rough, but the lack of formal G-force would be more of an issue. Roughness with, forceful elements aren't going to really be too much of a problem. This kind of results in rides like Tidal Twister, Big Apple, and Mind Eraser being really fun rides. Well, yes, the Soul Coaster in Colorado being Mind Eraser for a top 30 is a weird phenomenon. I won't deny this being a fun coaster mainly for the forceful inversions and the fluid pacing of the elements. The vertical inversions in the front offers nice entries of punchy positives, sustained until reaching the tops of their respective inversion. But the inline twists offer a sudden entrance for each. And then the moment itself holds nice sustained laterals towards the front of the train. I'll say my favorite type of inversions are the ones that with the abrupt entrances towards really forceful forces sustained. Then the constant speed variation with really flowy elements. The lack of slowing down much keeps a consistent pace that naturally flows together despite being an older coaster. Both of these aforementioned pacing and forces is why the layout is so fun. I'll say that the layout isn't the longest, with seamless pacing and a limited amount of elements. The ride does feel slightly short of what it could be. Not saying it's something like Adrenaline Peak in length, but given the multi-loopers we are spoiled with in length a lot of times, specifically from B&M, the Vekoma SLC is shorter in comparison. It's also worth noting the comfort. I would say that I didn't get headbanging given most of my head surpassed the head padding. I wouldn't deny that the coaster was consistently shaky and rough. So be warned about this specific coaster in the next one, which is a clone. And number 23. Given that I already talked about what I liked about the SLC layout, I'll instead point the differences of why I preferred Professor Screamer Skywinder a little bit more, although not by much. The main thing was that unlike Mind Eraser, where I had no idea what would happen, I had a better time enjoying the layout after sitting on my thoughts for the aforementioned Mind Eraser. Not only that, I experienced the identical forces subsection, I also realized there was more positives in sections like the first drops valley or the 270-degree turnaround. I'll say that there definitely was less comfortable moments than Mind Eraser, given it was less shaky. There's more awful potholes and moments in terms of tracking. I wouldn't say it was a turnoff for my enjoyment, but it was closer to doing in that compared to any other coaster that's not in my bottom 20 or something, or rides that don't have much redeeming. In which I kind of thank the newer Vesta strengths for making the ride likely more comfortable in comparison to what could have been with the over-the-shoulder strengths. That said, I do theorize that the Vesta do dampen some of the laterals compared to laterals on like the traditional over-the-shoulder strengths, given that I felt a lack of lateral bracing for the double inline twists on this version compared to what Mind Racer had. Well, while I would say that this is a bit more flawed, I think I enjoyed this variant more, hence why I get a higher ranking. Also, the color palette is cool as fuck. And now we talk about the B&M at my home park. Woohoo! Emperor at Seaworld San Diego, though it's not really something that I would overlook here. Well, yes, Emperor probably has the shortest and least amount of elements out of the B&Ms I've done. It does make up for the lack of quantity, with the quality of the pacing being some of my favorite out of any B&M I've done. I dare say that there is no dead spot for Emperor, really. The first drop, I finally experienced the sustained floater airtime in the back row, followed with forceful positive forces sustained throughout the first Indelman. All of the valleys are pretty forceful with positives, although most are less sustained than the first drop though. Then the ride kind of mixes up with the elements of holding a few floaty arrow banked turn. A 0G winder that either nice whip on the edge seats or floatiness in the center. This corkscrew had floatiness on the left wing as well as in the back, which it was pretty cool to see. Even the final turn had forceful positives. Really, the excellent pacing paired with the varied forces is why it ranks so high, but the minimal elements is what makes Emperor so low. Tangential thing to also mention, because modern B&M is rough, at least considered by many people. I would say there is a small vibration in back edge sheet, but I wouldn't say it was any too big of an issue. Unless your expectations is a glass smooth ride, not much is really happening. Anyways, moving on. Number 21 is Hang Time at Knott's Berry Farm, which would be a solid multi-looper as well, with a few differences. Hang Time would have the usual positive bursts in the valleys of inversions that were quite solid, but also would have some airtime moments as well. A lot of these valleys include with there's the corkscrew, the cutback, the uh zero negative G stall loop, cobra. Well, no matter what, you're gonna get positives in the valleys and not much else though. The first drop is like for airtime as well in the back is pretty good. I really like that in the final speed hill, giving nice pops of ejector airtime. The main thing about this ride that works is pretty much the pacing that being pretty consistent as well. Having not much interruption in pacing occurs with a fluid layout. Granted, it may not be as flowy as Emperor or something, but feels somewhat longer in comparison. Emperor kind of has like a few moments at the very least. This kind of makes a couple laps in some way, feeling slightly longer. Unfortunately, though, it is still short as compared to other loopers, especially in the state of California. So, going to knock a point against that. The forces aren't as sustained as other loopers though, but there is a little variety here, so it kind of stands out. Not really, yeah. So now we are starting our top 20 with Batman the Ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Now, with Batman the Ride, this is a compact inverted coaster that holds some intense maneuvers. The first half holds solid vertical loops, which, while not too intense, are surprisingly sustained in positive forces throughout both of them. The zero G roll is also quite fun with a mix of floatiness and snap back to back in terms of sequencing. The Helix has pretty forceful positives sustained as well. But then the second half, however, feels a bit more complete and quantitative than the previous four coasters above, with two very jarring wing over corkscrews, plus some intense laterals and positives turns, was well fulfilled the ride more so than the SLCs, given that those kind of die off towards the end. That said, pacing isn't all perfect with Batman the Ride, given the straight section connecting to Helix, and the second half does nothing really. I kind of wish that this could have been an inline twist for the transition, but that's pretty much too late for the ride. That's fine on its own, and a model that has lasted over 3 decades. Batman is pretty solid for pacing though, and has a lot of memorable moments in sizable quantity. Next up, we then have a surprising one with Electric Eel. So for this one, this is a compact but pretty forceful launch coaster at Seaworld San Diego. A lot of many notable moments of force, I'll say. From the twisting drop with a great pop of ejector airtime, mixed with a quick lateral switch, and falling valleys on positives in the back row, to exposed hang time on the Heartline roll, to the backwards lurching riders forwards, to the other forces located like the laterals at the twists or positives in the valleys. Now this ride is a force machine, though the intensity and variety, something that I haven't seen in no other coaster underneath 1,000 feet to accomplish. In terms of consistency as well, for just a small ride. In fact, the quantity of elements is surprising for a small ride where, compared to other rides like Accelerator or Boomerang, where I criticized them about varied shortness, even somewhat Electric Eel, it's like the Electric Eel has elements that can count on more than 2 hands, In terms of the forces that I haven't really noticed that kind of felt less spectacular on this ride, it kind of helps, with the where it's there's forces provided throughout most of the experience, really. In that regard, Electric Eel turned out to be a preference over something like Emperor, really. That while Electric Eel may not have perfect pacing like Emperor has, where it flows from element to element, Electric Eel has a couple of dead spots like the top of the non-inverting loop as well. Electric Eel still has solid enough to the point where I wouldn't find it incomplete in pacing. Its length is somewhat short, sure, as well, which is kind of dragging it down, but I wouldn't say it's as abysmally short as Full Throttle. It isn't underwhelming anymore, so solid coaster, I guess. But on the other side of the spectrum of intensity for premier rides, we have Backlot Stunt Coaster. Now, yes, this is a bizarre option given the low intensity of the ride outside of one moment, but my preference for Backlot Stunt Coaster over Electric Eel comes from the fact that, on top of the variety of forces, the ride feels quite longer in comparison. Plus, the more complete ride that's provided with it's like with the quantity as well of forces as well for myself. Now, I will definitely see many will saying comparing to Electric Eel, Electric Eel is much more spectacular for more intense forces, and this could be a preference. But that's not to say Backlot lacks any forces. The standout for by far is the sustained helix filled with positive forces, pretty much compressing the riders for around 5 to 6, even 7 seconds. Then the rest sustained pops short bursts of many forces types, such as 2 large straight drops holding pops of air time in the back row, then some spins holding some lateral pops, while some valleys having nice bursts of positives, and the lower turns indoors having sustained laterals throughout. Actually, no, it's not. It might be positives, but I kind of forgot. In more ways, the ride reminds me of a mix between Manta and Arctic Rescue, with the former of the variety of forces and the family thrill nature, while the latter for the attempts to immerse the riders in the theme with a flowy layout. While Arctic Rescue feels like a snowmobile that drives throughout the snow with windy turns, flowy elements, and area theming, and unique curvature. Backlot Stunt Coaster uses those windy turns and unique theming, and tries to show a driving setting in LA, which gives the coaster some attachment to an idea where it feels more fulfilling, really. In terms, I like the variety for a coaster that's somewhat mild. That said, I do wish that the coaster could rank higher if it wasn't primarily for the hold at the second launch. Now, I know there used to be a show scene, and the program hasn't really been updated, and I know, this ride existed for 2 decades, but in return does interrupt the pacing for a coaster that has decent amount of prime ride time, and as well, solid flow. Like, flowing through the elements is not really too much of a big problem outside of this part. But whatever, I still found the coaster fun, and still a decent amount of value to the ride. Now, up next for King's Dominion is their most inverting coaster of Dominator. Interestingly, as of writing the scripts, this would be the last new coaster of the year, being number 76. And honestly, for a conclusion, I thought it was okay. Now with the coaster, this is pretty much a sprawling, floorless coaster where the inversions are spread out and mixed in with some non-inverting track. Now, at first, I might have been reminded of another B&M coaster that had a similar concept later on the list, but in comparison, I felt a bit underwhelmed. As unlike the previous ride, where the inversions in the first half were more closer together, and then the long stretches of track was in place to entertain riders between corkscrews, Dominator feels more sporadic in inversions. Having a lot of track that holds speed, sure, although not too much force really outside of this valley and this helix. Dominator as well doesn't have the amazing flow that the aforementioned ride has. It's just like you have like a straight amount of track. It's like some turning track and stuff. It kind of rises up and down, but then afterwards you go into an inversion, which is cool, but there's not much build-up or anything. But despite my nitpicks, I'll say that the pacing and elements are still enjoyable. A really whippy and intense first drop in the back row, which I'll give it a credit. That is actually a pretty forceful moment. A very loop with forceful positives in the valleys and a float at top, which a lot of B&M and vertical loops do have, like some sort of float. And then okay cobra roll that has sustained pauses in the half loops, but doesn't have the laterals I like out of cobra rolls. Then traditional corkscrews have mild lateral snaps during the moments, which, while yes, definitely feel a bit underwhelming compared to Firebird, which I experienced 2 days prior. I'll say it's okay. As I know that B&M is a bit different, and plus this probably has a more complete layout. And overall, the coaster decently flows well due to the speed and some forces. Sure, it's not my favorite, but, you know, solid. It's alright. But personally, my type of B&M, I've always preferred more action. And Silver Bullet is one example for this list. With Silver Bullet, all the elements really flow well from one to another, in which, while not going through an inversion, will still keep its momentum with some flowy turns doing something different from the last element. Something that I appreciate from Silver Bullet. The inversions on their own is pretty well executed, with the vertical loop having constant positives, nice sustained G's on the Cobra rolls for positives mixed with lateral snaps in the back, depending on where you sit, as well with like the edge seat or the more middle seats. The floatiness on the 0G roll as well, with nice corkscrews that hold either lateral snaps or sustained positives depending on the row. And a sustained helix filled with positives over a lake, really. While the ride is not rip your face off intensity, they're still impactful in offering inversions in a way where it doesn't really feel too mild to really gloss over or forgettable, really. As mentioned before, the non-inverting transitions flow very well too, given that much more wavy turns occur to connect element to element over just more bland straight track. And to add on, I don't really mind the first drop, given that despite being a more shallow slope compared to other B&M inverts, in which I've only experienced 2, don't worry, it doesn't feel longer than something like your average Vekoma SLC. At least this one has a lateral snap towards the left side of the back row for the train. Now, I know there probably could be better B&M inverts, 100%, but for now, I will say this is probably my favorite invert so far. And up next, oh boy, another controversial one. So as of California's main lift hill hypercoaster, this is pretty frowned upon for lacking as many moments in airtime in both sustainability and in quantity compared to others. And while yes, not much is present, I'll say that it feels somewhat unique and fun. The first drop, while not feeling sustained, still has a nice 3/4 of a second levitating out of your seat in the back, and kind of giving me that interesting profiling, you know, a bit unique. This as well with sustained speed, and furthermore, the drop is great for experience speed for how long it's last. Mentioning that many seconds occur. Then yes, the floater hill is also quite nice, given the sustainability of the moment paired with the faster speed, given that the moment is lower to the ground compared to other hypercoasters. Although this is just me theorizing, given that this is my only traditional lift hill hyper. You can thank Intamin for that. While I appreciate the airtime on the ride, the moment is more for diversity rather than focusing given this is a positive G machine. For quick bursts in the vertical valleys, which are pretty forceful, to the more sustained ones on the horizontal turns, which all of them are quite forceful and sustain the pacing really well. They flow quite nicely throughout, in which most of the ride is well paced, given the ride sustains a nice speed throughout, flowing through the turns and really kind of seamlessly. So much so that arguably the worst part of the ride is present with the mid-course brake run. That pretty much slows the train to a crawl. Unfortunately, disrupts the fast pacing of the coasters in a not so fascinating way. I tolerated it on my first ride, given that I had someone to talk to during that ride. I could be more critical when I get more rides on it. For now, I do think the pacing is quite solid enough to flow through the ride quite nicely. Even at the mid-course, the ride quickly catches speed back up, you know, with the forces staying up throughout most of the ride, plus holding a variety of elements and moments of different approaches for airtime, positives, and even laterals that, as I forgot to mention, there are some of the turnaround track in the back. Even though, yes, this is probably one of the weakest for length, for super long coasters with over 4,000 feet of track, and yet it's ranking 15th. I do somewhat wish that the coaster had more track, though, available, given that the coaster feels like more of a mid-sized coaster. in which, yeah, it feels a bit similar to Silver Bullet. I still like it though. But X2, on the other hand, I'll be gladly to be more nitpicky with this one. Now, of all the coasters on my list, this is likely the most controversial placement, given that this ranked many rank this in their top 3 or even 5 in the state. I'm not one of those people, given though the tricks don't really do much to me. So pretty much, X2 is a fourth dimensional coaster that deliberately uses rotating seats to do unique elements that is more thrilling compared to the average coaster. Normally, I would be all in for flipping seats, as my favorite flat rides, even like my most favorite flat rides, the like booster arms or like even like the zipper carnival rides. Those are really awesome. Those are those flipping gondolas make the experience. But compared something to like X2 to a booster flat ride, shows a few differences. Mainly with the flipping orientation on a booster to be more violent due to the positions of the hinges, creating more longitudinal forces and thus making a more centrifugal force. Well, X2 is perfectly heartland, meaning that, yes, it is going to be a more comfortable ride, but it's not really going to be that intense in terms of like rotation or additional forces. In addition, the flipping's also taken more leisurely compared to free flipping seats, having a slower rotation per minute, and 2 predictable moments of the ride, if not researched and memorized beforehand. This is unfortunately probably like a first impression try. I would recommend not spoiling it, or like having high expectations, given like, given that I know those people really call those the flips disorienting, and you know I don't want to spoil it, but personally I wasn't too impressed. In which, as well, I would say I could prefer Green Lantern First Flight. As yes, it was a bit. I heard it was definitely violent and not really comfortable for flipping. The aggressive like ride for the gondolas with the extra spice, plus I really love the inverted airtime that happens on like these flipping rides. That's really like something that appeals to me, you know. I would. In which, yeah, does it mainly have the fear of heights and distorting elements, though. Wasn't too impressed with that, but overall, I would say that I was like, if you like that, you like that, you know. Thankfully, a saving grace for X2 is present. That being such a nice ride for experience in general forces, although not perfect. Most of the valleys offer amazing bursts of positive G-forces that feel usually sustained during the central crest. Then with one of the fly-to-lie, sideways airtime could occur on the left side of the train. In a lot of ways, X2 is solidly paced during the elements, even tolerating the turnaround for that, which while kind of slows down for the ride, it isn't too significant where it ruins the ride. It could be a bit more of like a breather in some way. You return back to form afterwards. My biggest gripe over the coaster, outside of the wasted potential for flips akin to my preferences, would be the variety of forces and length of the ride. Talking about the forward first, the main thing that the coaster really has worth noting is the positive forces with just vertical valleys. Which, while fun and enjoyable, I'm more of a guy that prefers variety. Well, whether it be more variety in twists and turns or simply having more force types, that will feel more significant towards more to enjoy. More to pull out for what you may like out of X2, you know? More to, like, you know, appreciate, comment on, love, and pretty much, like, remember. In addition, the length of the ride feels somewhat short compared to the rest of the rides above this, which only a couple moments are included in each stretch. With 3 main turnarounds during the coaster, some would say this is a welcome addition given the disorientation and intensity the ride offers. Airing them out, and you know, that's fair. This is more of a personal preference, which overall X2 is a nice ride that offers something, but personally not obsessing it over other enthusiasts. In a similar boat as X2, I'm also targeting Magic Mountain's other loved coaster with Twisted Colossus. Even with the dueling, I still have similar complaints as to what X2 has. That being the focus on one force type and the length being feeling a bit short. Although in some way, it feels like there's some aspects I slightly prefer for Twisted Colossus. For one, Twisted Colossus is more moments of force in comparison to X2 having 8 to 9 moments of force for both sides. In which combining those, that's pretty much 12.5 airtime health for the entire ride. With some moments of slight variation for moments like the duration of sustainability or a wave turn that has brief laterals. Not forgetting the inversions included that add something different to space out of airtime, although I'll personally say that RMC inversions aren't exciting on their own, given the floatiness has less to really force-wise compared to the rest of the layout. But despite listing some differences, the coaster has a similar force that unfortunately hits a lot. That being aggressive ejector airtime that feels quite similar in like sustainability, at least compared to my other iBox coaster. Additionally, the coaster feels somewhat short, where even though it technically has 60 seconds of prime ride time and 4,990 feet of track, it essentially feels like 2 roller coasters fused in one. Which, while a unique gimmick, it really doesn't feel like one continuous coaster compared to West Coast Racers. Given the lift hill in the second half is more of an interruption compared to West Coast Racers' block zone, it has a show scene where it feels like it's one main coaster. That said, I would say by far the racing aspect of this is my favorite out of the racing coasters I've done. While West Coast Racers and Racer 75 aren't guaranteed to race, at least from my experience, Twisted Colossus is more like a game where not only we have more than 2 trains running, but also the fact that the crews could get trains out quickly could have racing as a reward for the cooperation of guests and the operators. I felt more excited when getting to the lift hill during those rides. Compared to like just waiting, seeing like another train come by. But yeah, Twisted Colossus, I guess. Now we have a defunct classic that used to be Wild One. So I know this is a weird choice for number 12 spot, but the main thing I prefer over Twisted Colossus was the lateral moments. So while yes, Wild One's airtime hills hold sustained floater, feeling inferior to Twisted Colossus' airtime moments, Wild One has 2 great lateral moments at the very least. Holding a great turnaround and later a great helix gave me Ghost Rider flashbacks. Additionally, I found this ride to feel longer in duration, giving more time to appreciate the elements compared to Twisted Colossus' rapid pace for a short period of time. Wild One is a simple ride as well, having an emphasis on sustained floater on the hills in quick succession, but the laterals make the ride much more entertaining compared to just a leaner and out back layout that only just has airtime. That kind of drains down, sure, but I would say the little bit more variety kind of puts it a bit higher, you know. It's also a long ride, so that's also kind of cool. Yeah, I'm repeating myself. I'm sorry. But interestingly, we now changed from my oldest credit to my newest with Rapterra. And interestingly, this was a surprise out of B&M, given that this may hold the most variety out of any B&M I've done. Between this and Emperor, I would say that Rapterra also feels quite quick as well, although it kind of fixes the variety and length issue I had with Emperor. The first launch, I would say, is one of my favorites, given that its initial punch is good, plus the sustainability is forceful too, or 4 seconds. One of my favorite launches, and also one of the best moments on the ride. Then the variety, the valleys like the horseshoe turn, valleys, the corkscrew, and the dive loop have a nice burst of positives that I've experienced out of their dive loops. Laterals are present on the twisted S-hill and dive down after the turn, which are also fun. Some airtime on the drop down, and a little bitty bit on the camelback exists too, although not too noticeable. But pretty much my favorite moment is the Raptor roll. Holding really nice sustained hang time while transforming out of the roll have a nice change in positives. I also loved the pacing of this ride. Really feels like the elements flow quite nicely, that, while not intense, has some force that gives a feeling of something happening. The forces themselves are very well done in my opinion. Well, it's not forceful, not tense, Uh, the forces are actually, it's more about the flow of elements, you know. Flowing like between one and one, also gracefully. That grace is probably what I would say about this ride, you know. The length is even solid as well. Something I wish Emperor had more duration like this. As well, like it's not too short. It has a sizable amount of elements. It kind of lasts a little bit, even if it's not as long as other B&Ms. If I do have one wish, though, however, it would boost the ride in my top 10. I do wish there was more airtime or stronger airtime present in the ride. Really, just so it could round out the layout and clear some spots I declared kind of lacking. I also noted that Camelback that definitely didn't really have sustained airtime. It's barely noticeable, but yeah, a solid launch coaster though. It has nice pacing to break it up. I really liked it. Alright, before continuing to my top 10, I do have a few things to mention, just for a little break from the actual list. Given that learning about top 20 coasters might be a bit much consecutively, and also that the script so far is, I think, 35 minutes so far. But first off, I would like to announce that I have a 2025 cameo from Coaster Studios that will be coming out on Christmas Day, where they react to my top 10 without any context as to why. Unless they have, seen my reviews and me knowing, but, they don't know. At the very least, they may not know as much. And plus, I have fun commissioning these, and it's really cool to see their different perspectives on ride. Compared to what? I think they'll definitely enjoy as well. I do have a few honorable mentions worth noting before progressing to my top 10. First off, we have Belmont Dipper, century-old wooden coaster. It pretty much is a family coaster layout. The first drop holds nice laterals, although most of the forces are tame and not at all sustained. The pacing can be solid sometimes, but other times it feels quite slow. Fun coaster, but underwhelming compared to my top 30. Then, probably my weakest of the major thrill coasters is Six Flags Magic Mountain. The only one not making my top 30 was Apocalypse Ride. This honorable mention demonstrates how strong Six Flags Magic Mountain's lineup is for me, but really Apocalypse Ride is pretty underwhelming. It has an amazing sense of speed, but it lacks the forces that I look upon on that coaster. Desert Storm is a pretty cool ride for intense forces, but with the loops and first draw. However, the layout kind of feels short, and it does have some filler with like the helix and all, but personally, I prefer this over Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. Barely though. Now saying my favorite launch is provided by the coaster, but the ride feels really short, and even lacks some force on some parts. As we've learned about Full Throttle, a couple of great elements with nothing else will get this so far in my ranking. It feels even more embarrassing that this is my best intimate coaster experience this year, or even really ever. When I miss stuff like Pantherian, Velocicoaster, Superman Ride of Steel. Seems like really great rides, but Boomerang at Elitch Gardens is really cool for forceful and really consistent incursions, but feels short too. It does have like really nice, really forceful and sustained positive G-forces, but really a Cobrel, a vertical loop that's not much, Canyon Blaster Adventure Zone holds really forceful and sustained loops with an airtime hill that has nice ejector airtime. But the pacing I feel like is lacking in quantity, and the consistency for me to get engaged, and I mentioned this is the only Vegas not in my top coaster in my top 30. I do like the loops and airtime hill though, but like the corkscrews, the helix, just fill out the track. Roar is not an honorable mention at Six Flags America. I'm only mentioning this given this is my least favorite thrill coaster, and also a significant one for this year. From the constant roughness to the forceful layout to the lack of speed, the coaster really feels bland and not worth riding for me. Flight of Fear at King's Dominion has an amazing and forceful first half of sustained positives on the vertical inversions, plus the corkscrew snaps. That really loses its spirit after the dreaded mid-course. It definitely ruins the bit of a ride experience, as it's my second least favorite mid-course stoppage. And really, it's like all on mate. Oh, and really, it kind of like fills out the track. It's like it's versus the potential I know it has. Racer 75 at King's Dominion. Similar to Wild One's layout, Racer 75 is a down and back layout for floater hills. I found the hills to not really hit as consistent as Wild One. Really had like some roughness I wasn't too bothered with, but like the hills were very hit and miss, and along with one lateral moment, consistency and variety definitely impacts the ride for me. Oh yeah, cool. There's only one lateral moment, and then the rest of it is just there. Not much, really. Final honorable mention would be Incredicoaster as something. This is by far the longest ride on the list, but unlike other long coasters I like, most of the track I feel is quite wasted. Long meandering turns and straight sections that most of the time don't do anything. Quite literally, fill it a ride. And that I actually prefer Arctic Rescue and Firebird over those more twisty and more engaging elements. Although both I would say I would also consider rough and meandering, but regardless, I don't think I should spend much more time on honorable mentions. Time to get to the top 10. And starting off with number 10 is my beloved Manta. The coaster that made me an enthusiast in the ride that, despite being quite tame, is really the complete package. Overall, I would say that Rapterra has the more memorable moments with most of Manta either having weak strength with force and or having quick pops and forces. But the variety of forces plus the flow of elements feel more complete compared to Rapterra, where not much duds are present. I like the floater pops during the first half of the camelbacks, along with sustained positives in the upward turns too. Then the laterals on the double down, drop down, and twisted hill are quick but effective. There's also nice ejector pops on the twist down and the twisted hills. Finally, forceful pauses on the final turn, which is nice. Well, yes, a stupid mid-course brake run is present and the launch is really weak, which also kind of deducts points. I slightly prefer the length and variety of Manta, plus the balance between forces I feel is better, where a little bit of everything is in equal ratio and is present. I might want to talk about this ride more in the future. Right now I have a review on that covering the elements. Really has solid pacing, not the perfect ones, and that's pretty much the critiques, including the not so much intense forces. But now we're moving on to Grizzly, King's Dominion, which kind of felt interesting. Courtesy of Gravity Group for reprofiling the layout, the coaster felt interesting in the way where it gave nice deja vu to Ghost Rider in terms of forces. Where Grizzly had good pacing and great forces for a wooden coaster, apart from the first turnaround, all of the hills are aggressively ejected airtime, sometimes paired with forceful laterals. Along with this turnaround having the heaviest laterals I've been on, with one of the best for sustainability and definitely for intensity. The pacing is also really consistent for the most part given the rapid succession of elements presented. In terms of the ride's pacing, it feels quite fast, you know. It's like after the first turnaround, it definitely picks up where he stays low to the ground. There's like this turn and like a lot, and most of the elements hit. That said, I do wish that the coaster didn't have the aforementioned large turnaround towards the start, given it feels quite interruptive for pacing. I get it's a bit scenic, and you know, like that likely wasn't reprofiled, but it kind of like, you know, kind of kills the mood for like the pacing, but at the very least it's at the start and not hurts the middle. Otherwise though, a pretty fun wooden coaster that combines airtime and laterals and is, well, nicely balanced. Up next is Joker's Jinx, and really this is a night and day difference compared to Flight of Fear for the central region of not having a mid-course brake run. In return, the coaster has a really interesting second half of constant sustained positives with some lateral jolts throughout in the helix, which makes a really interesting coaster that holds constant forces throughout while having some variation throughout. These variations include kinks in the track, giving laterals and switching directions in the helix, moving it up and down, stuff like that. I would also want to discuss the inversions as well, which are quite intense. The Cobra and Sidewinder have sustained pauses and lateral snaps included. The corkscrew perfectly ends the coaster with a sustained moment of laterals. I do wish airtime was included in order to have some diversity, but overall it'll be extremely happy with the ride experience overall if the layout or the other outdoor compact Premier LAM coasters have similar pacing. Number 7, Tatsu. Next up is an interesting one, but my god, it's really well crafted in terms of layout. Tatsu is great for a main reason of having amazing pacing that builds up to for a finale and unique forces on your restraint. Positive forces on your restraint feels very unique. Having force sustained that's pulling you forwards is pretty awesome and cool with your body weight, although not necessarily intense. I also like the floatiness or hang time towards the top of the corkscrews. Falling on your seat back and restraint is also a quirk that I haven't seen on any other coaster I've done. Also done so gracefully, nevertheless. Then in terms of build-up, 2/3 of the coaster is built up to the largest element in the pretzel loop. By having these really tall elements of floaty and graceful moments with positive G's and amazing views of the park. Then the pretzel loop is pretty forceful as well as sustained pauses on your back, which while not too different in feeling compared to the traditional coaster force-wise, is still a unique riding element like this for the visuals alone. Plus an intense moment that's less abrupt than Magic Mountain's thrill aero coasters. Although I personally prefer those elements in those, although not by much. In retrospect, the coaster is an amazingly structured creation, having an entire ride feeling entertaining while building up to a climax that you've just got to get mentally prepared for. That said, I do wish B&M Flyers had more elements utilizing the flying position more. Having more variety and types of these elements and forces provided is like the Vekoma Flying Dutchman had. I was like where that ride had. I was like had a lot of like elements on your back, a lot of like elements that are taken in unique positions, like more than just a glorified inverted coaster. But alas, my chance of riding one of these was gone just like that. Oh well, at least Tatsu is in my top 10. But you know, I prefer another Magic Mountain coaster over this. In fact, that would be, well, Viper, of course. But I cannot stress how underrated and memorable this coaster is. Or the park may have X2, Tatsu, or Twisted Colossus as their well-known intense coasters. I wouldn't sleep on Viper at all. That coaster is really intense and quirky in many ways. From the first drop having 2 phases of forceful laterals, having each segment going in different directions, to the extremely forceful vertical loops that compress the riders in their seat. The first one, in fact, is my favorite version with how it constantly compresses the rider further and further. The double loops also have amazing sustainability, although slightly less forceful than Canyon Blaster's double loops. I love the ejector pop in the mid-course as well. The Batwing is okay with bursts of positives and most compact forces of loops. The loops for the Batwing, along with the corkscrews feeling okay towards the front, where not much force is present. I do like the laterals and hang time in the back, though, as well as the final turns have pretty forceful laterals. As to add on, the pacing is also quite nice, having really fast pacing and sustained speed for the mid-course is something that feels like a dream, really. Plus just solid consistency between elements in the second, where most of the elements have at least something coming up. Even during the worst moments of track, having only less than 3 seconds of filler, where ride is something cool anticipating. All the main things that this coaster does best is the decent quantity of really forceful elements. All of them felt memorable and unique and distinct. While I love the usual variety of forces like standing pauses, laterals, and airtime, Viper is something that just elevates its elements by having different sustainabilities, different sequencing, different starts and ends of these elements, different intensities, different shapes. There are some slight hiccups in pacing overall, as the Batwing and corkscrews are top tier, along with stretches of track that don't really entertain the ride throughout. But that's me being nitpicking compared to what I like in my top 5. Viper is a really awesome ride, and you should definitely check it out if you haven't already. It's not the most comfortable with like having like some abrupt jolts in like and like some of the transitions, but it is a bit one of a kind ride. You can't really get much out there. But now speaking of my top 5, my number 5 would be Riddler's Revenge. Very much a coaster where it mixes a layout, it tries out different feeling sequences of elements with consistent flow, along holding trains that are exposed to net forces, specifically making more exaggerated forces for everything. The laterals and negatives are more affected in positive G-forces in this case. Regardless, this results in the forces feeling quite impactful with a unique layout for a map, at least for once I've ridden. The first 3 inversions have nice positive valleys that feel quite forceful, which it's quite cool with the size emphasize ascending the element and yet diving down in such a fluid manner. The pacing is also kept nicely with the lower turns, having some laterals and changes of banking and forceful positives for the physical turns on the non-inverting turns. Even places that are unexpected, like this valley after the corkscrew, as well as found weightlessness on this hill, which was cool on a stand-up coaster to feel. Or some floater which went on the right back, feeling interesting to kind of drop back down like that. The corkscrews also give nice sensations, with the first one having a nice lateral snap, while the second one has sustained positives. Now granted, the elements themselves aren't what make the ride stand out, although they do help the ride in a lot of cases. Moreover, I would like to compliment the aforementioned variety in trains, along with commenting that the flows very seamlessly with a nice amount of speed and present in elements that implement force, but not much for a change. Granted, there's one helix that doesn't do anything, but otherwise I feel like the ride, I got a lot by filling. The ride feels long enough, which is another benefit given that this is my longest B&M loop out there, along with being my favorite B&M yet so far. Very refined, pretty unique, and quite fulfilling. If only I had a little more airtime, that could have made it much more better. But regardless, we're now moving on. Which now we got a strange one for me. Not unorthodox for others if they have an equivalent amount of experience for me and they chose this ride over it. It's probably quite more likely that this will be in the top 3 or something. But more so weird for me that, given my criticisms of other iBox coasters, Twisted Colossus about how it's about airtime. Now, don't get me wrong, Twisted Timbers at number 4 is also an airtime buffet, and personally these aren't my favorite, but I'll say that there are differences in which make me slightly pretty much prefer Twisted Colossus, not slightly. For one, I would say that the airtime on this hill feels slightly more varied compared to Twisted Colossus. There are many hills that kind of feel a bit predictable in strength, with ever so slightly varying intensities that aren't too different. Twisted Timbers kind of mixes stuff up, as the 3 consecutive large camelbacks hold strong and sustained eject airtime. A lot of sharp pops also exist, in which these are taken back to back. Then some smaller speed hills that combine laterals with the aforementioned airtime. That's another thing. Unlike Twisted Colossus, more of a balance for forces is present, with more laterals is incorporated, such as the speed hills and the 2 single dives with some nice lateral snaps, plus the barrel rolls down drop in the back, with a nice moment of levitating that I found better than most RNC versions that I've done, whether if it was their own rides or if it was or the rides they fabricated, like Tidal Twister. The main determining factor for Twisted Timbers for being this high in general is paired with the amazing pacing and the longer ride duration. The airtime feels like there's not much of an end, really. It keeps on firing hill after hill, not much breathers outside of the turns. All composed within a ride experience that doesn't end abruptly in action. Unlike Twisted Colossus, where each 30-second portion has one U-shaped run, Twisted Timbers holds 2 laps, feel more closer together and quite long by nearly a minute. Really, I can't gloss over the pacing for this ride given its rapid fire throughout. Even if it holds the least amount of riding in my top 10 for me, The latter statement, which is the varieties piece, is the main reason why I don't place the ride higher either. As a top three, has also great flow and consistency. But they also have like a lot more variety that I can like take out of. Like airtime is just like, airtime. Like, and you can do like a lot with airtime, but really the variety of forces between like one and another. And different like unique approaches is what makes me more happier about this stuff. Up next we have West Coast Racers, which while seemingly small in size, I won't lie, the coaster pretty much checks out most stuff on my list as what's considered my favorites. The forces really varied from the forceful ejector airtime to the graceful floater pops to the forceful laterals to the impactful air and hang time to the float on the large corkscrews to the sustained pauses on the turns and even some kicks in longitudinal forces on the launches. But what about the pacing? Ride seamlessly goes throughout elements, spending the right amount of time on each course, where it's not too drawn out but isn't abrupt either. I also didn't call out any dead spots outside of the intentional holding section for the second lap. Even then, the holding section is still entertaining and anticipates the racing aspect, which unlike Twisted Colossus does feel like less time is wasted in between cycles, both in distance and in duration. As a result of this reduced delay and the more varied elements, the coaster feels less interrupted in retrospect. Feeling like the ride is closer to 70 seconds of prime ride time instead of the 2 30-second halves, in which that actually definitely benefits the ride for like pacing wise. Finally, while the elements aren't the most punchy, they're on more of the forceful side of family thrill, meaning that I can actually at least more recall it more so than Manta. The Helix and High Five give nice G's, but to be honest, I don't really care that not all the elements are intense. All the elements are well balanced and forced, that no force has priority over the other, along with forces I remember. I think the main criticism I would give is that the majority of the layout feels like duplicates, have duplicates in a lot of ways. Like the helixes and large corkscrews, and there's a few others that I'm not thinking of as of this moment. While yes, it is the point of the elements given, it's a dueling train, but for coasters in general, I personally would wish for more diversity throughout the 4,000 feet of track. Regardless, those are more nitpicky, given that for a dueling coaster, I think it achieves what it needs. Anyways, on to Silver, which is symbolic to the list, given that Paint Scheme really wants to be gold, and thus the ride as well. Wonder Woman Flight of Courage is my favorite RMC of the three. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record for repeating this shocking and unpopular opinion, or restating it at the very least, but as the final one of these controversial takes, plus the fact that I've basically repeatedly shown my tastes over and over, I'll say for Wonder Woman that the main thing that the first half has really distinct and complexity constructed elements. All having many different combinations for forces, and all without disrupting pacing. Going in order, I'll say the first drop in the back is forceful as hell, trying to yank out the riders out of the train with sustained ejector airtime. Then, to not sound repetitive, all the valleys in the first half have forceful pauses sustained during the lowest segments. This is actually really great to transition from starts to ends, and more flavorful for the elements. The dive loop has nice upside down airtime, although very weak in the back. The camelback holds sustained airtime that starts off with floater and then quickly transitions into ejector airtime, although not RMC ejector airtime. The 0G roll may be floaty like the rest, but the laterals are ascending and descending have nice snaps that probably tell you that we're transitioning out the next element, and plus, it's kind of cool. The crow's nest also holds a nice pop of airtime into and out of the element, a feeling nice that it feels a bit different compared to the rest given it's a flat turn. The 0G roll has a nice combination of weak laterals and floatiness to an average succession of rotation. I would honestly say that I have a bias towards Light of Courage's first half of the number one. Pretty much of everything that I would say may want from a coaster and elements, its sequency and frequency. I would say though, some elements could be potentially more punchy than has it now, especially that given that RMC is known for intensive moments. But I'm fine if it's left the way it is. But what bothers me most is my perfect 9.8 out of 10 dream was ruined with the second half, feeling quite okay in comparison. As the rest is mostly composed of repetitive hills with weak ejector hills. Outside of this awesome ejector pop off of the mid-course and the intense positive filled turn, listen, while I'm not opposed to repetitive elements as looking at Twisted Timber's fourth spot, this kind of lets go of the potential for creativity that the ride was kind of building up, which is kind of disappointing given that the excitement built from the first half is a bit wasted, not to deliver. I mean, in return, it does rob the greatness of what could have been a great start, middle, and end, It leaves it just be okay, but, I still love the first half of the ride, and really that kind of brings it to my top two, I will also state that the forces aren't really aggressive on this ride, which I don't have much of a problem with, but I know somebody could be bothered, so just be warned about that, It's not an RMC where you're gonna get, yanked around and all. It's more modest, Anyways, moving on to number one, we have the one, the only, Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm. So, here we are with what I claim my favorite coaster. In terms of this coaster, this may not have the favorite elements, but does excel in what the ride builds up in pacing, the balancing forces, and a really symbolic structure that for excitement filled throughout a long ride experience. Where from the start, the ride starts off decently and then continues to build more and more excitement, more thrill, more sustainability, more forces, The ride uses laterals and airtime mixed together to make a harmonic balance that keeps the ride interesting on its own. Where it starts off with much more or less intense airtime. You have a floater hill sustained, and you have some less intense floater pops throughout some of the drops in the back. Throughout these hills, there's also a lot of lateral sustained, not truly intense laterals, but forceful laterals enough to be interested. It's also not at the most sustained where it's it's kind of quick. And it's it gives you a second or two, but it's nowhere as sustained as what happens later. And I also really like how the first half focuses on drops, while the second half focuses on speed. And then it's as well, this isn't really a first half, second half type of thing, where there's not much transition, because there is actually I think a transition that does really work well with the ride. The turnaround actually has nice lateral. Has okay laterals. It gives you a view of the park, and then you're anticipating for that one drop that builds up all the speed again. In return as well, it kind of gives me the vibes that I explained with the other two wooden coasters that I said beforehand. Where there's some speed hills that have pretty aggressive airtime, paired with aggressive laterals back to back, and it's there's also much more quicker pops as well that are more aggressive, but there's also the two turns that have really sustained laterals. Those are actually hold a lot of speed throughout, and it's pins you against the side for multiple seconds, especially the finale with the large helix. It's combine that with like the amazing speed and stuff, and you really have a ride that builds upon each other, where elements become more extreme and really keeps my excitement. So much so, um, in which I find it pretty engaging as it continues through the ride, just topping itself really. Um, the very transitions as well, like kind of dip down and up, and honestly, that I was like, all of this, I was like, all of this like stuff to just keep me on my toes. It's like this is how it makes it my number one. Um, and really like it really yeah, this is actually quite the experience really. I was like, I really like Ghost Rider. There, and also there's some stuff that like I was like, there might be like one hill that doesn't hit, but otherwise the ride has really great pacing throughout. Keeps it consistent. It builds upon each other. Has an awesome start, middle, and end. Uh, I'm sorry, I'm a bit repeating myself. I'll probably just end this section right here, but it's easily my number one to do the sequencing of the elements. Although I wouldn't say it's the only contender. Granted, Intamin it wasn't too lucky with for me, but Pantherian may have potential for being very unique transitions and having very fast pacing, along with Velocicoaster doing the build-up stick with a variety of forces. The both of best worlds. There's also 2 dozen coasters out there that could prefer over Ghost Rider as well. Those all could have amazing variety, amazing sequencing, amazing forces, like very memorable experiences. All above Ghost Rider as well. But alas, this is a mystery as well as we end off for 2025. I don't know what I'll be anticipating for the future, what parks I'll go to, or which I'll hit in my top 10, but I'll say is we'll continue to grow the park portfolio and continue my understanding for parks and coasters alike. I may travel to other countries, I may experience new manufacturers, and I may gain more or less coasters depending on my circumstances. But whatever it is, I will say I'll probably be back here talking about them, and I would say I would rather recap my experience in retrospect that I have enjoyed. Anyways, we'll see you guys next year for more coasters, and hopefully I do finish the reviews for my parks. I do need to catch up on that, but it's like in order to finish all my stuff, I think that would actually be I think I want to complete Diesel's coaster reviews before before I get to the end of 2026. You know what I mean? Anyways, I'll see y'all next review, or I guess the cameo. I guess. Bye.